Greetings, everyone. It's the Jamaican Tory back with you again to discuss an aspect of the constitutional reform process as the JLPNP continues in their attempts to usurp our constitutional monarchy and replace it with their constitutional republic. I'm asking you all to please like, share, and subscribe as we get into this discussion. The title of today's video will be Whose Constitution is it? I was inspired to do this video after I saw a story in which the Minister for Legal and Constitutional Affairs claimed that what the current government is doing is an attempt to Jamaicanize the Constitution. That's what they say, Jamaicanize in quotes. This idea stems from a misconception that has been bandied about for many years that the constitution that we currently have is not really ours. There has been an attempt over the years to try to pretend as though the Constitution of Jamaica was not written by Jamaicans and for Jamaicans. The idea that is being bandied about, and let me say it is a false idea, that the Constitution that we have was written by England and just sent down to us and we just adopted it. And what they use as justification for this is that the first section of the Constitution uses some language that would seem to indicate that it was written outside of Jamaica. But this is a misconception. There's a reason why that language is there at the beginning of the Constitution. So let me give a breakdown of what really happened. So back in the 1960s, after the collapse of the West Indies Federation, when Jamaica decided that it was going to go its own way, a convention was being called to draft the Constitution. When the Constitution was drafted, after the document was put together, it had to be ratified in England. And so what happened was that another conference was being called. So the first conference was called out here to draft the Constitution. Another conference was now called in England to ratify the Constitution. They even had a song about that convention and how it led to independence. And of course, I will have that link in the description for those of you who might know that song. It's a very traditional Jamaican song. We often hear it played around independence time. I won't attempt to sing it because, singing is not why I'm here. But I'll have it in the description. The point I'm trying to make is that because the constitutional document was ratified in England, that then gives a false impression that it was written in England. The document was not written in England. It was written right here in Jamaica. You want to know who wrote it? The JLPNP, their predecessors, they are the ones who wrote it. The persons who were in the JLPNP back in the 1960s. Men such as Alexander Bustamante, Norman Manley, Florence de Glasspool, Howard Cook, Edward Siaga, Robert Lightburn, and men like those. Those who we call the founding fathers of Jamaica. Let me also point out that in the Constitutional Convention that was written, that was put in place to write our Constitution, there was not a single non-Jamaican present. Not even the colonial governor, Sir Kenneth Blackburn at the time, sat on that committee. It was all Jamaicans. So when the idea is being bandied about that the constitution needs to be Jamaicanized, that gives a false impression. The constitution is already Jamaican. The constitution has always been Jamaican. And the reason why the Republicans are trying to sell this falsehood to the people is because they have an agenda. And their agenda is to make sure that the people vote the way how they want them to vote. So they are trying to manipulate the people by using language to suggest that our constitution is a foreign document. It's not a foreign document. Bear in mind, I personally wouldn't have an issue taking out the original phrasing of the constitution and replace it with a preamble. That is fine. But that isn't an entrenched part of the constitution that requires a referendum. We know the entrenched part of the constitution that requires a referendum. And as far as I'm concerned, that doesn't need to be changed. But they want to change it for their own interests. So they are then trying to sell us the argument that the constitution is not really Jamaican and they need to Jamaicanize it. What is there to Jamaicanize? It is already Jamaican. It is already hours and hours alone. As a matter of fact, let me give a parallel between our independence story and the independence story of several of our Commonwealth allies, such as Australia and Canada. And of course, you'll see the Australian and Canadian banners behind me. Both Australia and Canada, when their constitution was first written, it was an act of the British Parliament. And because it was an act of the British Parliament, whenever they wanted to have their constitution changed, they had to go to England to get it changed. Canada's first constitution was written in 1867. It was not until 1982 that they had the right to change the constitution on their own without going to England. Australia's constitution was first written in 1910. Do you know when they got the right to change their own constitution? It was not until 1986 that they got the right to change their own constitution. The very fact that we can even talk about changing some parts of the constitution, and bear in mind there have already been sections that have been changed, for example chapter 3 with the Charter of Rights and all of that. So we know that it is not impossible for us to change some of the less entrenched parts of the constitution without a referendum. So when they tell us that they're going to Jamaicanize the constitution, that is a lie. It is a lie. Because if the constitution was not already Jamaicanized, we would have to have gone to England to ask them if we could change our constitution. That's what Canada had to do. That's what Australia had to do. We don't have to do that. Why? Because the constitution is already a Jamaican document. So when they tell us that it's not a Jamaican document, it's an English document, it's not true. It is false. The men who framed our constitution were all Jamaicans. As a matter of fact, in the thumbnail to this video, you see Jamaica's very first cabinet, the very first set of persons who made up the government of Jamaica. And those were the very same people who wrote our constitution. They were all Jamaicans. So don't be fooled by this notion that our constitution is a foreign document and it needs to be localized. That is propaganda. Government propaganda written by current members of the JLPNP who quite frankly are not half the men that their predecessors were in the 1950s and the 1960s. The old-fashioned JLPNP, those men had wisdom. Those men chose the right path in giving us the constitution that we have. But those who came behind them, their successors, they did not have half the caliber that their predecessors have. And we see that in the kind of government that they're trying to give us. The people of Jamaica, we must not allow ourselves to be fooled and hoodwinked by what they're trying to tell us. These are the same people who will tell us that we were not independent in 1962 and therefore we need to become a republic so that we can get our independence. No, that again is false. There is nothing, and I mean nothing, that a sovereign state can do that Jamaica does not already have the right to do within the domestic and international sphere. Why can we do that? Because we already have a constitution that guarantees our sovereignty and is recognized in international law as such. So when they're going to tell us that they're going to Jamaicanize the constitution as though the constitution is not already ours, that is complete and utter baloney. It isn't true. I'll give you an example of what happens when a country has a constitution that they didn't write. You see this banner right here behind me? That is the imperial banner of Japan. And why do I highlight Japan? Let me tell you why. In the late 19th century, when Japan was beginning to modernize, they drafted a constitution for themselves that was inspired by the German constitution, the old German constitution, that is. And that constitution, even though it was inspired by what they saw in Germany, the content of it was written by the Japanese people themselves. And they operated under that constitution right up until World War II. After World War II, when the United States decided to drop 2 atomic bombs, one on Hiroshima, one on Nagasaki, the US became an occupying power within Japan. And one of the things that they did was that they crafted a new constitution for Japan. And that constitution completely reformed many aspects of the Japanese government. And it was a very, what would I say now? It was quite a struggle for the Japanese people at the time, because one of the things that the United States wanted to do was that they actually wanted to turn Japan into a republic like them. And General MacArthur, Douglas MacArthur, in his wisdom, decided that, you know what, that is one thing I'm not going to touch, even though there are some aspects of the Japanese constitution that is going to have to be more palatable to American interests. One of the things that they did was that they imposed what was called Article 9, or the Pacifist Clause. And what this clause did was that it demilitarized Japan, taking away their right to exercise their sovereignty as far as waging war on foreign powers is concerned. Japan has operated under the constitution for over 70 years, going on to 80 years now. And while there has been discussion about altering that part of their constitution, it is a very controversial issue. Another thing that they did, I was reading an article some time ago regarding a section of the constitution that they spoke about the equality of the genders, male and female being equal. And of course, Japan was a very patriarchal society, even more patriarchal than they are right now. And that clause in the constitution was actually put in place by young Jewish feminists from America. And of course, we have the other sections of the Constitution, which were, of course, drafted mainly by American influencers with very little influence from the Japanese people themselves, the government, nobody at all. It was really the Americans who drafted it. Even to the point where if General MacArthur had put his foot down, the monarchy would not have remained in Japan. It was really not an instrument of the Japanese people at all. Even though it says we the people at the very beginning, they didn't write it. The Americans wrote it for them. What is my point in telling the story? And by the way, before I get to that, I mentioned earlier about the feminist clause or the gender equality clause. Personally speaking, I don't necessarily have an issue with that being a part of their constitution. What I do take issue with, however, is the fact that it was written by a complete outsider whose values and norms were coming from an American ethos rather than the Japanese, which to me causes some problems for legitimacy. Why do I tell the story regarding Japan? It is simple this. There are incidents around the world where constitutions have been written for countries with very little input from the citizens within the country themselves. The original constitution was inspired by the Germans, but it was written by the Japanese themselves. The second constitution was written for them by the Americans. In our case, while it is true that our constitution was for the most part inspired by Britain and some other parts of the Commonwealth, the document itself was written by them. It was written by our own people. And because of that, the whole idea that it needs Jamaicanizing needs to be thrown out the window. It is already Jamaicanized. Am I then saying that, the document that was written in 1962 should never be altered in no way, shape, or form? Not at all. Not so long ago, I spoke about the court system and the need to replace the JCPC with the CCJ. And we also know of the alterations in Chapter 3 where the Charter of Rights was put in 2011. So yes, there are areas that can be reformed and areas that can be modified. And of course, I myself have no issue with a preamble. What I do take issue with, however, is a Republican form of government and the removal of the monarchy. I also take issue with the fact that the government is wasting time on this matter of a referendum when there are so many areas of the Constitution that can be reformed without a referendum. But they're focusing on this one area because this is the one area that gives them the most power and gives them the most bragging rights. You know what I say? This government, the JLPNP, both sides, they need to be held to account for the lies they have told the Jamaican people. They're trying to pull the wool over the eyes of the people of this country. And I think the people should send a very strong and clear message to them that they will not tolerate this. And in my view, the best way to do that is to turn out of the polls and tell this government we are not accepting your republic.